Okay, welcome back, Mike Munger. How you doing?
I am fine. It's great to be on the show.
Yeah, I'm really glad to have you back. This is your second appearance on here. You were here a few months ago. We talked a lot about the sharing economy and some other political things. I wanted to update you a little bit about that because it was extremely helpful for this course I'm giving. And I had the students listen to it, and we did it over a few classes, and we sort of went into detail with it. And then I gave for the midterm oral evaluation, they had to create a sharing economy idea, like and present it, And some of them kind of missed the boat and stuff, but some of them had these incredibly good ideas. I mean, this one guy, Yasin, had this idea for people who work as cleaners to be able to, like, how like right now, if you're like an immigrant from Latin America and you have to have someone who organizes the work for you, and you go with a team, and that person, or and then they pay you, that people could offer their services directly to people, right? So his idea was an application where, like, I own a condo in a wealthy part of town. I'm busy. I don't have time to clean it. I want to have someone come in and clean it up for me while I'm at work. So I go on there, and people are bidding, right, for what they can do and how long. And then and then I leave a key in a box. There's a whole system. The person comes in, cleans the place out. They go back out. The payment's done. And then he was very aware of the obvious security concerns, right? So he had these ideas for like a body cam. You could have like any. He said, oh, you could go partner with this. He had a company that makes body cams, and then you could like do this like, and it was just so incredible. It reminds me of what we were talking about in the other podcast, how you sort of throw these ideas out to a younger person, and it's like, wow, they come up with something. So I don't know if you had any comments about that, or just, I don't know.
It is exactly the idea that it is transactions costs that prevent many otherwise mutually beneficial transactions that makes people think differently about the world. So you can commoditize all sorts of things that now we don't think of as commodities. So labor is something that has to be organized by a boss. And so if I want to get my house cleaned, I call the boss of a house cleaning firm who then acts as a broker to find some workers that can come there at that time. And it's convenient for me in the sense that I don't have to negotiate those times. But if you had an app that did all that, then you could cut out the boss. And so one of the things, it's like fair trade coffee in a way. Fair trade coffee, the consumer wants to give more of their money to the farmer in El Salvador. Well, fair trade house cleaning might be I want to give more of the money
Yeah.
to the house cleaner from El Salvador who happens to be here in the United States rather than the boss to end up it's I'm not saying the boss was doing anything wrong. The boss was providing an important service, and that is was organizing the labor. They'll be there at a particular time, and I'll guarantee, because my firm has a brand name, that we won't steal stuff. Which an app can do all that, and you might not even notice it. So I think that both the general point that we should think in terms of what new ways can we find to serve each other and to cooperate if the transaction costs were reduced, and then just let kids run with that because they can change the world.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Basically, it sounds like from the way you're describing it that, it's sort of like the dispatcher in a taxi company is not necessary anymore with Uber or something like that. So you're eliminating a cost, which you call transaction, with part of the transaction cost, right?
Well,
It's
but
Go
transaction
ahead.
costs are organizing and providing information. So those were real things that need to
Right,
be
right.
done.
Yeah, they were a necessary thing when there was no application to do that work in some senses, right? And it sounds like you're saying it's a bit like it's automation, because I've got some of the students have questions about AI, which is something I want to get to later. Would you say that Uber is effectively an artificial intelligence dispatcher? Is it something like that? I don't know if that's the right way to frame it.
It's a question of cybernetics. So cybernetics design and implement systems that are self-operating, that are autonomous.
Right.
And you
Right.
may not notice how they're working because their internal workings are basically, we don't see them because they operate so fast.
Yeah.
But we're in turn, so automation is like that. It used to be to make shoes, you'd have somebody to cut out the top, somebody shape the bottom, somebody sew them together. We've automated that. It happens so fast you can't even see it.
Mm.
So I've always said that software is to service jobs as robotics and automation are to manufacturing jobs.
Yeah.
So software automates a lot of service and organization tasks. And once you start to think in those terms, then there's the first order is the app takes information and processes it and then gives an answer to human being. The second order is that AI takes the information, processes it, and then takes the answer and does something else.
Right.
So the if you think in terms of smart contracts, my example of a smart contract in order to get, because smart contracts sound very complicated. It's got blockchain, it's got a bunch of steps. If you've ever bought a soda from a machine, you ever bought a Coke from a machine, that machine is a smart contract. It says if the following condition is met, then execute the following step. The condition is I've put in the correct change, and then I get to press a button and the machine responds contingent on those two things being true. Those two conditions in computer science terms have to be true. So if correct amount of money received equals true, and if button pressed to choose a soft drink that is in stock is true, then I take an action. Otherwise, I don't take an action. There's no human involved there, but there's a set of contingencies that come together. Once you start to think of software doing those hardware tasks of a set of contingencies
Yeah.
being met, and then I ask something else, and another contingency is met, smart contracts might be able to take a lot of the function of what we now think of as bosses, which are fairly routine. What you need to do is to be able to generate some sort of truth or consensus about whether the condition is met or not. That's always going to be the problem. So I come to clean your house. I'm going to get paid. Did I really clean it or not? Does somebody has to go check? Can I tell? How do we know that the contingency is met? Because once I get paid, it may be hard for you to get in touch with me.
Yeah.
And it's the enforcement part. It's those contingencies. Smart contract software, though, can take over all sorts of what until now have been not automated because software is to those sorts of service jobs as robotics and automation were to manufacturing. And it's going to the thing that you've mentioned, and it's true in a couple of ways, and it's a catastrophe, is so many people are going to lose their jobs.
Yeah. Yeah.
This process is going to wipe out thousands and thousands of jobs for people that aren't trained to do anything else. Because that's what these revolutions do. They eliminate jobs.
Yeah, we talked a bit about that last time, but you mentioned last time I reviewed the podcast how it acts as a force multiplier, right? So it kind of so yes, the taxi dispatcher and the cleaning company, I don't know, foreman or whatever it is, their job is I'm not sure if it's eliminated. It could be just changed in some way. I don't know, but put that to the side. That's automated by this smart contracting algorithm, let's say, like another way to name it, right? Now that takes away a couple of jobs, but it also means other individuals can be more productive. That Latin American immigrant can maybe make more money, or that, like in my case, I drive Uber on the side. I mean, I like to tell people that before Uber came along, I used to just put things up on Kijiji, call me, I'll take you to the airport kind of thing, and I would organize. So I made a couple $1,000s a year. But then when Uber came along, it just, augmented it up like to this much higher amount, right? So it's when people say that jobs are going to be lost, this is true. Can we do um I mean, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your recent discussion with Russ Roberts, where you two went back and forth on how you compare things, right? So how can we compare the taxi dispatcher and the the cleaning organizer losing their job to these other people gaining income. I mean, are they comparable? Can you just put it up on a ledger? This is Russ Roberts is always, how do you compare guns and butter, right? That's what if I get this number of guns, does that equal that number of pounds of butter? I mean, do you have any thoughts on how to make that comparison? It's very, very hard to compare those losses and gains. I don't know. I don't know what you think about that, but
You are clearly one of those libertarian nut jobs. You clearly
I think so. Yeah.
you're this weird sense of optimism that somehow we'll figure this out. And your only evidence for that is over and over again when people said the sky is falling, the sky is falling. The Industrial Revolution, automobiles, it happened. The fact that you and I don't know how clever people are going to figure out new ways to serve each other doesn't mean it's not going to happen. And so the fact
Yeah.
that I can't say, and in fact, in 1920, I couldn't have said all of the uses that automobiles, trucks are going to come to in order to make people's lives easier and better. It was still true that you have some confidence that if people are free to make their own choices and prices are free to adjust to reflect the scarcity of resources, we're going to figure out new ways to do that. So famously, we may have talked about this last time, when the automatic teller machine, what we now just
We
call
did.
ATM, we've sort of
Beautiful
forgotten.
example. Yeah.
But as soon as ATMs were invented, people were worried what's going to happen to banks. Well, it turned out that it was so much easier now to have a branch bank that you could have a small branch bank with an ATM and just two people inside whose job it was to carry out more difficult functions, loan applications, the things humans actually needed to do. So it used to be I have to drive 12, 15 miles to go to a branch bank. Now there's one within 2 miles. The number of branches increased by 50%. The
Wow.
total number of jobs actually increased because it was cheaper.
Interesting.
So
Yeah.
the I have argued that Chat GPT, for example. So Chat GPT is the application of AI to large language models where you learn, and what the software does, really all it does is choose the word that is the most likely word to follow in this particular sentence. And then it constructs large documents from that. Or AI might do the same thing for visual rather than text. So you might come up with art. So I've said that we should think about that like a calculator. And what I mean is, you're too young, but when I was growing up, there was a big debate. Should young people learn long division? Well, if they don't learn long division, how will they know how to do math? Long division is stupid. It's tedious. It takes forever. Nobody does long division. I have a calculator. I have a spreadsheet. I suppose if I had to, I could still do long division, but why would you want to have to? ChatGPT is a calculator. What it does is it's going to save us a lot of time on writing tedious text, letters of recommendation. There's a bunch of things that you need to write, maybe a lecture. There's all sorts of things that you need to write. And if you can do it quickly as a first draft, that saves so much time. Now, it's true that a lot of people who now make their jobs as writers or creators of visual images are going to have trouble. Their skills, there are people, when I grew up in rural Central Florida near where Disney World is now, and we had a friend who had retired there, but had worked for Disney for a long time. He was one of the people who was old. He had drawn some of the original cartoon cells
Wow.
for Mickey Mouse. So
Oh
the
my
very
God. Wow.
earliest Mickey Mouse cartoons he had, and he gave us some of those. So I have
Oh,
them
that's so
framed.
cool. Yeah.
So it's plastic frames and it's a single image. And so you have to draw hundreds and hundreds of these to have 2 minutes of usable video because a video is fast moving still images. It took forever to do that. They were hand colored. They were beautiful. Well, being able to automate that means that instead of having a 3 minute video and look at it and say, wow, isn't that great?
You have a
We had
2 hour movie.
hundreds and hundreds
Yeah.
and hundreds. Everybody
Yeah.
is a creator. Well,
Yeah.
once everybody becomes a creator, there's more jobs, not fewer. So it's true that the person who used to draw these cells, that person lost their job. But now I don't know, I don't have to know how to do that in order to create really interesting content. So I tell students what you need to do is learn how to do a better job of writing prompts for ChatGPT, how to create music, how to create video images, and how to integrate those using editing software. You need to be a producer of content. And we're actually already seeing that where people are doing this on TikTok. But the people aren't going to be writing papers just 5 years from now. That ship has sailed. We're done. They're not going to write papers. They're going to be creating content. But once everybody can be a full-fledged content creator, you're not limited by the fact that you have to acquire these technical skills. You can just apply your imagination. The world is going to change for the better. So I'm one of
Yeah.
those nut jobs libertarians too.
I'm glad to hear that. There's a lot in there. I'm a language teacher, so this, I've been thinking about this for years about how best to, and also, how best to do that as a training exercise, and also how best to bring a good experience of some kind. It really, like when you get into this, it brings into question what we're supposed to be doing. And it sounds like you're saying that people need to be more creative in the sense that just sort of rote figuring out what a good thesis statement sentence. I mean, the chat GPT can do that. What we need to think about is what interesting ideas can you bring to the table to sculpt. And I tried to integrate chat GPT into one of my classes, and I found it didn't go. I mean, what I did was I had them, instead of writing an argumentative essay, in favor of, the death penalty or against something like that. That's what I had them doing before. I had them get the chat GPT to write that and then have them comment on it to see, what's interesting about it, what were the assumptions and this kind of thing. And just because I'm convinced that these, I want to find out what's underneath the chat GPT. What's the chat GPT digging out of as a source material, and I want people to be aware of that. But it's hard to know how to incite creativity in people. It's very. It also, this is something, just to close the loop on this, that we did talk about briefly, is as we move into this kind of an economy, intelligence, IQ, and other types of, skills that are cerebral, let's say, become more and more important in terms of how we can exploit our skills in the economy. And I mean, does that create a set of challenges of people who are maybe not able to do that kind of thing? What their lives? I mean, a lot of people are worried about that. A counter to that might be something like, no matter how smart or less endowed intellectually, we still need people to do person jobs, to be with that old person when they're feeling lonely, and come in and look in their eyes and how are you feeling today? So I don't know, do you have any final thoughts? I want to get some of the questions, but just sort of a rambling question, but I don't know.
Well, we're already seeing an increase in inequality, and there seems to be a kind of bifurcation between people who are comfortable with digital techniques and those that are not.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that might very well get worse. In some ways, it's an educational problem. But it was once true that I could work for a boss and perform some rote function
yeah, yeah.
and get paid quite a bit for it. Now, it's not clear to me that that's the world I actually want my own children to go do that kind of job. In fact, James Taylor, the singer, has this song about cotton mills. Mill work, it ain't easy. Mill work, it ain't hard. Mill work, it ain't nothing except an awful boring job.
Yeah.
Because all day long you're at this machine,
Yeah. That's
and
pretty horrible.
you're breathing the dust of lint.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
maybe you're wearing a respirator, but it's hot as hell. Um, that's not that great a job. It is true that it paid reasonably well.
And it might have
The
been better than being on the farm. I don't know. Is that
absolutely better,
right?
absolutely better,
Yeah.
sure, in terms of the amount of money that you got paid.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
we created, Adam Smith recognized, he said that division of labor is going to go to the point where people are going to work on small routine jobs, very little creativity, very little room, scope for the application of me thinking. In fact, we want to get to the point where I don't think at all, because then I can practice increasing my dexterity and I can do it faster and faster.
Right.
That sounds
Right.
awful, except it creates a fund that allows me in my off time, which is most of the time, to
Mhm.
pursue my own interest and develop myself as a person. Now, if you fail to do that, it is true that, working in one of these working class jobs and then you go home and drink beer and watch television until you get pissed off and have a
Yeah.
fight with your spouse, that's a bad life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, so there has long been this sort of problem where
Mhm.
people may not be able to take advantage of the fact that commerce creates for them a space in which they can make a different kind of life, but many people do. And so
Mhm.
I guess I am hopeful that we will find new ways to have service sorts of jobs. The difficulty is that the kind of service job that you're talking about doesn't pay very much,
Right.
because
Right.
even though it creates quite a bit of value for this person,
Doesn't
what you get
scale.
paid.
It doesn't
Well,
scale. That's the
well,
problem, right?
it doesn't scale, and
Yeah.
the wage that, if there's a lot of such people that are willing to do that, it
Hmm.
means that I can't get paid
Supply and
more than
demand. Yeah. Yeah. So you have too many people offering those services and you can't scale them up,
well, but
right?
that's great
Yeah.
because they're cheap, and it means that many more people now will be able to benefit from those
That's
services. The
true.
question
Yeah.
is, how can we ensure that people are able to have the resources they need to create for themselves this kind of life? What worries me is that if we fail to do that, we will be subject to political demagogues who will say, now the fault of this is, and they'll make up
X
something,
group. Yeah.
somebody we don't like,
Yeah.
and we need to get rid of them. That's what's holding
Yeah.
us back. And we're very susceptible to political demagoguery because we'd like to think that some sort of savior or messiah is going to come and help us out of our troubles. Whereas
Hmm.
it may require that we work together, but demagogues are going to try to split us up. And I'm not trying to make a partisan point. Demagoguery comes in all sorts of ideologies and shapes and sizes. But
Hmm.
this kind of economic inequality that we're seeing, and this kind of uncertainty, the sense of precariousness, makes people more susceptible to demagogues.
Yeah, this leads me into something I did want to talk to you about. That's, now that we're taking a darker turn here, is I may not talk to you before the United States presidential election. So I was curious. I mean, it seems to slide right into that. I don't know what your feelings are there about, what's going on there. It
I,
seems it
I,
seems kind of a
I'm
strange situation, but
I'm a professional political scientist. I was chair of Duke's political science department for 10 years. And so I've been researching this extensively. And Jason, I've come to a conclusion. One of these two half-wits is going to win.
yeah, okay.
I mean,
That's
I'm sorry to go
that's
out on a
great.
limb, but one of these two sons of a gun is going to win. And that
Yeah,
really pisses me off.
right. I think you're echoing the sentiment of many Americans. I was talking to my brother a couple of months ago about this, and he had this sort of talking almost through his teeth in rage, like, why am I given these two as my choice? Like it's like, what is
Even the
going on?
people who know who they're going to vote for are pissed off
Yeah.
that this is what they're forced to choose between.
Do you think, I mean, it seems like there's this, I mean, you were talking about this polarization or a few minutes ago, this kind of thing, and there's this splitting, and you can definitely see a lot of fear mongering. Obviously you could put on the Trump side, there's fear of a lot of immigration and all this illegal immigration and so on and so forth. Now on the other side, you've got, fear of, Hitler or whatever it is taking over and not letting go. And I, I don't know. I look at this and I think, and I look at both sides and I think it seems like the United States, the people who founded it 250 years ago, they tried to create these institutions that would be able to function even in the face of such crazy winds. And I think, and I would be willing to bet that even if Donald Trump wins, he'll only be there for 4 years. I really believe that because I believe most Americans won't want, if I was talking to some friends the other day who were saying, oh no, all the people supporting Trump, they all have guns and they want to declare martial law and all this kind of stuff. And I said, okay. And then I started to think to just to try and ask this person, so you mean that those freedom loving, practically survivalist kind of people are going to want to live in a dictatorship where, like, they're going to want martial law? And she said, yeah, yeah, definitely. That's what they want. And it just seems like I don't really know how to even talk about this or think about this anymore. It's gotten so strange, but I don't know. You have no predictions, no anything
I
like that?
I
Yeah.
predict one of these two guys is going to
Yeah,
win, and we're
right.
going to be sorry.
Okay. So you think it's going to be negative either way, whether it's the flubbering, man who can barely stand up and falls down off bicycles, or the narcissistic half monkey orange whatever, I don't know. Okay. Well, that's pretty dark. But again, you're an optimist. I mean, I would suspect that you don't think that this is going to be some sort of a turning point where, it becomes a dictatorship. I don't think, I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that fear?
No, our institutions are stronger than that. And
Okay.
I don't, even if Trump wins, I think that there will be a reluctance to allow him to do the more extreme forms of anything approaching dictatorship. He's he can't pay attention for very long.
That's right.
So
Yeah,
he
that's
is
true.
largely ineffective, actually. So
As president last time, he fired people constantly. It was this revolving door that was very chaotic, right?
yes,
Although he did have, I think that chaos had a side benefit. Like, I really think that people are afraid of a powerful, crazy person, right?
yeah,
Because if somebody's crazy and they're powerful, then if you can't predict what they're going to do, you best to sort of back off and be careful. And if someone's powerful and they're not crazy, they're predictable, then you can figure out where to push the lines up to. And I think this is my personal view. I think his craziness actually helped a little bit with the international scene. I think that's, whereas,
well, it
yeah.
helped in the sense that it limited his power, and I think that that will happen again. So
You don't think that it actually scared the likes of people like, dictators in other countries a little bit? No, you don't have any. No, that's what I think. But
it might have. He simultaneously takes a position of saying that the U.S. is not going to be involved in any wars and we're not going to do anything. Which, if I'm worried about U.S. conventional power, means that I don't have to worry about that. Now, if I'm worried about U.S. nuclear power, then I might be. So
right,
maybe North
right.
Korea was it was
Kind of
a problem
scary.
for
Yeah,
him.
I was scared. I admit, when he was doing that whole bullying thing, I thought, geez, is this World War III? And then it
Yeah.
turned out it worked out. At least it didn't start World War III.
It did, if your standard of workout is didn't start World War III, that's a pretty. I would like more than that from the U.S. presidency.
Fair enough.
Well, he's a pretty good president. He didn't
He
start
didn't
World War
start World
III.
War III. Yeah, that's funny. Okay. All right. Well, I don't want to spend too much time on that. I want to come back to your appearance later with Russ Roberts because it was a very deep conversation, I think. I think I'd probably have to listen to it again. And I want to talk about your paper there. But what I thought I would do is get to some of these questions because you suggested last time that I, collect questions. So what I did was I told the students, I'll give you, because it was sort of the end of the session, things were kind of chaotic. I said, I'll give you a bonus if you. So not that many gave the questions in, and most of the people who did were students who I've had previously in other classes. So I think that the ones who know me, they said, if he's going to give a bonus, he's really going to give me a bonus. So those who gave the questions in, they got up to a 5-point bonus, which is pretty nice. And some of them,
That's pretty substantial.
it is substantial. One guy ended up with 100% as a result, which I thought was kind of cool. So, I mean, all the better, right? Some of them got 1 point or 2 points. But so anyway, I thought I'd start. This is from a guy called Jericho Ortega, a very, very smart young guy who's been my student a couple of times. His first one is no system is perfect. He's referring to you. You've talked about how communism just doesn't work. What are the major flaws of capitalism, if there are any? and how can they be resolved? It's a little bit like this connects to your conversation a little bit with Russ Roberts, I think, the other day. What do you think about that?
Well, there's four major failures of market systems. So asymmetric information, public goods, externalities, and the tendency to become either monopolies or to have market power. Capitalism, because it may concentrate financial power in a few enormous firms, may also be a threat to democracy. Now, it seems to me the best solution to the problems of capitalism is to limit the power of government. That may seem paradoxical, but the reason there's so much money in politics is that there's so much politics in money.
Yeah.
That if I'm a corporation, I may be able to make more profits, and I'm making air quotes, which makes for a great podcast, I realize, but there may be more profits for me if I spend money and invest, air quotes again, in lobbyists so that I can get favorable regulation, trade protection, and subsidies. Now, none of those are actually profits, but in terms of my bottom line, it's helpful. So there's a real tendency in capitalism, in a democracy, towards cronyism,
Right.
towards the use of lobbyists and the use of money to try to influence government to increase the profitability of my position. The solution is not limits on corporations. The solution is limits on government's ability to deliver those benefits in the first place. The problem is that if I'm a senator or a member of the US House, it actually benefits me to be able to receive campaign contributions and sell off the patriarchy of the United States, to be able to sell off long-term profits that future generations are going to have to give up for my immediate gain. And so both politicians and corporate leaders are likely to collude in this move towards cronyism. And so I do think that the criticisms of the left, that there's a potential for cronyism, those are legitimate, and market defenders of market ought to take them more seriously. The problem is that if you look at capitalism and say, well, there's obviously problems here, we should have socialism.
Yeah.
Every flaw in consumers is worse in voters. So that's the thing that the single summary of my entire philosophy is
Yeah.
every flaw in consumers is worse in voters. And all of us are the same thing. So you're telling me consumers can be misled.
So can
Consumers may not
voters.
have
Yeah.
information. Consumers overvalue free stuff, all of the stuff that Dan Ariely in behavioral economics tells us. That's true. That
So
is
do
straight up
voters.
true.
So do
It's a real
voters.
problem for consumers. It's a worse problem for voters.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, if your view of socialism is we're not going to have democratic socialism, we're going to have a dictator and a social.
Yeah.
Now you're taking things in a whole new and interesting direction. I don't know how to handle that. If you think that dictatorial communism is the way to go, having one strong man who is going to make judgments about where we all work, where all investments are made, that's just slavery.
Yeah.
So I don't know how to persuade someone not to do that. So the answer to Jericho's question, it is a good question. There are totally flaws in capitalism,
Mhm.
but all of the flaws in capitalism are worse in socialism.
Yeah.
Every flaw in consumers is worse in voters. And I'm a liberal. I want to stick with something that involves democracy, where government is responsive to the will of the people. If that's what you want, I'm afraid we need markets.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that Jericho is not, one of these people who wants a communist dictatorship. He really enjoyed my classes, and he knows how I am, how I'm really. I hate that kind of thing. But I really take your point about, the first of all, it's a very good point that every consumer is often also a voter.
Yeah.
Most of the time, not everybody votes. Everybody consumes, but not everybody votes. But so that's an interesting dichotomy, and we get into incentives, right? The incentives of the politician are to offer things to get through the next electoral cycle, or for some sort of a legacy. It's one of those two things. The ribbon cutting ceremony for that bridge, where they can, and then they can have their name put on it or whatever,
Yeah.
and that kind of thing. And that it doesn't matter whether the bridge doesn't work properly or can't pay for itself that later
Well,
10 years
it
later.
matters, but not enough for me to worry about.
Right. Yeah.
I would
Yeah.
prefer that it works, but once I cut the ribbon, I'm going to do something else.
Right.
And of course,
Yeah.
if it doesn't work, I'm going to blame the greedy contractor.
Yeah. Right.
It's
Yeah.
capitalism. The problem here is capitalism.
Yeah, yeah. But just one final thing is you put a different tagline in your email, which is really fascinating about how I forget the exact wording, but it's basically when you vote, you're not doing positive sum economics. You're doing zero sum. It's, you vote for this guy, he wins the entire what we call a riding in Canada, and then he or she goes and votes, and everything is sort of all or nothing. Whereas economic structures are much more, there's competition in a much more granular way further down the line, more immediately and more. So I don't know about that, but okay. So I noticed I was looking at his other questions while you were talking, and he has another one here which directly connects. You express your preference for non-intervention by the state in economics, which I think is true. Are there some exceptions? In your ideal society, what does the government do economically, politically, et cetera? So it seems to, what should the government doing? Be doing? The courts? I think you'd agree, right? Army, military, anything else?
Well, we talked about this in my conversation with Russ, and my definition of government failure is a government that fails to provide the basic infrastructure and foundation in which both commercial and social interaction can take place.
Mm-hmm.
And so, a system of property rights that are clear and well defined, a judicial system for adjudicating disputes over property rights, national and local defense,
So police
police.
and military for the
Yeah.
foreign threats, police and other things for internal
Well, so
disorder, right?
the military to protect us from foreign threats,
Right,
the police to protect us from local crime,
right, exactly. Yeah, okay.
a currency system, regulation of the financial system.
So sorry, I just wanted to ask you something quickly about that. You believe there should be some sort of like a Bank of Canada, Federal Reserve in each area, or because I know my anarchist friends, they believe that currencies should compete with each other. So I don't know, just on that, is there any room for competition on monetary policy? I don't know.
For the United States, that's not where I would start. I am surprised that many of my anarchist friends think that that's the problem. So I look at all the stupid things that the US government does. And for them, the big one is the Federal Reserve Board. And to me, the Federal Reserve, they're okay. The US
Yeah.
doesn't have runaway inflation. It's not that awful. Um, if there were another 100 problems that we could solve, I might say, yes, we should worry about currency. But there's two
Yeah.
issues.
Yeah.
One is, should we have competitive private currencies, which no one wants? It's a political non-starter that what would be required to persuade people. The second is, should we have a Federal Reserve with discretionary power over deciding interest rates and using open market operations to influence the money supply? We could have the dollar, a fiat currency, but then you could have a monetary growth rule that says we will grow at 2% per year, and we'll implement that with computerized smart contracts. So I'm happy to get rid of the discretionary part of the Federal Reserve,
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
going all the way to let's get rid of the dollar and have competitive private currencies. There, the transition cost to get there would
Yeah.
just be
Yeah.
gigantic because all over the world, assets are being held in dollars. And frankly, the US is artificially benefiting from being the world's reserve currency. The only
Mm-hmm.
reason we're able to borrow so much is that people in China and Southern Europe and South America want to hold dollar denominated assets. So they're
Mm-hmm.
willing to buy US Treasury securities at a not very high interest rate. And that's the reason that if we stop that, if we said, we're going to go off the dollar with competitive private currencies, we would the US deficit would just skyrocket.
Yeah.
So I think that's just politically infeasible. But if you want to say we should move to Milton Friedman's notion of a fixed growth rule that then we could all predict, instead
Mm.
of what happened between 2017 and 2021. The the money supply doubled twice.
Yeah, wow. It's incredible.
That's very hard to predict, and so it's surprising the inflation was so small.
Yeah, it's what you're saying is interesting because that like it's a really good point. I mean, because people talk about these examples like I think in Scotland a couple of hundred years ago there were a bunch of different banks that offered, and they say, well, there was more competition and all this, but what you're saying is interesting. We got this main currency used in many parts of the world. So to move from that to a bunch of American banks all competing, it seems like there'd be a lot of collateral damage during that transition. That's one thing. The other thing that you mentioned, I think is really interesting, is automating, so which is to take away the responsibility from individuals. It reminds me a little bit of there's a guy called Coleman Hughes, who's a podcaster. He talks a lot about race. And he says something about like racial issues in policing. He says one way to fix it is just things like cameras.
Yeah,
Like a red light camera doesn't take your picture because you're black or white or whatever. It just you drive through the red light, you get then you can't turn around and say, oh, that cop was racist. He stopped me.
yeah,
And this sounds like a similar idea. I said, well, the thing it sticks at 2% per annum. And if you go above that, it just starts reducing the supply. If you go down too low, it'll increase it. It's a simple algorithm.
yeah. And
You
it's
know?
predictable. And the argument for discretion is the claim that the Federal Reserve knows enough and has the proper incentives to try to smooth the amplitude of the fluctuations in aggregate economic activity. And there's just very little evidence that that's true. We've often screwed
Yeah.
that up. So
Yeah.
the Great Depression was probably in large measure caused by bad, stupid actions by the Federal Reserve. And then
You mean
after
not
that,
not not increasing the money supply, sticking to the gold standard, you mean?
they cut the
Right?
money supply by
Right.
20%.
Right.
They were worried that there was going to be inflation.
Okay.
And so
Okay.
since prices were falling, they cut the money supply, thinking that
Yeah.
the quantity theory of money required them to do that because the velocity was constant. So
Okay.
Milton Friedman, in his book with Anna Schwartz, The Monetary History of the U.S., documents that very clearly. So
Interesting. Yeah.
one thing is, do you think that the Federal Reserve should do this? Another question is, do you even think the Federal Reserve can do this? Because if they can't do it accurately, what Milton Friedman says, there's long and variable lags. So
Mm-hmm.
you have changes in monetary policy, and it's like steering a giant ship,
Yeah.
except that the tiller is attached to a rubber band that slips. So sometimes
Right.
I turn the tiller over and it takes 8 or 10 minutes before the tiller moves. But
Right.
other times I turn the tiller over and the tiller moves immediately. I don't
Right.
know which of those two situations I'm in. So sometimes when I increase the money supply, by the time it has an effect, we're already past the downturn and
Other
I'm not
times it
causing inflation.
jerkily changes the economy immediately and you didn't expect it to happen that quickly,
Yeah.
right? It's yes,
Yes.
it's wow. That's yeah.
So
It's
that
Go
means
ahead.
that we'd be, given how screwed up, how difficult that is, we'd be better off with something predictable.
Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. It leads me to a next question here. I'm going to change students. This is from Sofian Boukertab, who's a young guy. He was my student twice. He's a Moroccan immigrant, really good guy. He says here, with the rise of AI, is there a way to implement implement it in a business related to the sharing economy? So your thoughts about I don't know just artificial intelligence connecting to the sharing economy? I don't know. We've already covered it a little bit. Do you have any thoughts there?
It seems to me that AI might be able to automate the process of writing contracts or writing and negotiating contracts. So I could put in my reservation price. Suppose I want to buy a car. So I could put in my reservation price, And in the prices could be negotiated by AIs. We could write contracts. The I think there's a lot of promise in um, Ethernet, in in Ether as a potential alternative cryptocurrency, as a way of writing smart contracts. So I think AI and smart contracts in ways that I, as an old man that use pieces of paper, can't
Yeah, yeah.
understand. If you, I would urge all young people to study computer science, learn Python, learn at least one, maybe it's HTML, but learn some computer language where they're literate in being able to create code.
Hmm.
Because then you can use AI to write code. So
Right.
once you're in a position to, if you know how it works, you can get AI to write code. Again, everybody can be a creator.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
you have an idea for an app. So let's suppose that you think, what would be a great idea is people have to carry laptops around. That doesn't make any sense. They should be able to rent a laptop at their destination because everything lives on the cloud. So
Mhm.
I have Dropbox, I have software, all of those things are stored on the cloud. So I go to
Starbucks?
Montreal.
Yeah.
I go to Montreal. I get off at the airport, and on my way to pick up my bag, I stop by the Laptopia machine. I put in my credit card. It identifies me because the app knows what sort of laptop that I want. And down comes a laptop. I put that in my bag. I haven't had to carry it. I use that laptop for the 2 days that I'm in Montreal, and it stores all the work that I do in the cloud. And then on my way out of town, I turn the laptop back in. I always am renting. I will always have a high quality, latest laptop.
Mm.
And it's pretty standardized. They're all the same. Now, it would be hard to write the software you'd need to create that app, but AI will allow you to write that code. And then all you need to do is get somebody to edit it and debug it. So if you
Right.
can think
Right.
of an app, if you can think of a new situation where people can rent instead of own, and then you can use AI to write the software you need to put the app up on the Apple Store or the other phone store, you're
Yeah.
in business.
Yeah. You have there's enormous opportunity for competition there from different providers. There'd be different. Some people like their MacBooks. They prefer that, this kind of thing. Yeah, I confess I'm not quite sure why it's better unless I go to a place where, like, if I go to the airport, why not carry my laptop with me instead of getting it at the airport? If I go to Starbucks and I need to do something for a while, I can get it and then give it back. I understand that, but maybe I'm not seeing something.
Well, I was trying to give it as an example. I have a laptop, it's 4 years old.
Right.
I could buy another one, but
Right.
if I rent them, it's
Right. Oh, I
always
see.
available to me.
Yeah. I don't
So
have to
I
think
always have the
about,
latest.
yeah. So I can just live my life without going, oh, I need a new
I don't need
computer
to own
now.
a
Yeah.
laptop. Why
Yeah.
why do you want to own a laptop? That makes no sense.
It's a bit like
If
leasing a car instead of buying one, right? It's like I
if
just I
it
just
were
want to
cheap
have
enough,
something that works and I'm going to give it back after a while.
yeah, if it were
Yeah.
cheap enough, because there are a lot of days I'm working on my desktop. I don't use my laptop. I use my laptop on trips.
Right.
Sometimes it'll
Yeah.
sit there for a month.
Right. So, just a final point on that. You said it was difficult to write the code. This is many of my students, by the way, in these classes were computer science students. In fact, I believe Sophiana and Jericho are both computer science students. Can you shed a bit of light to the listeners about why it's complicated? Because I confess I don't know enough. Is that a technical detail or?
Well, the learning how to write code means you need to know syntax, and you actually need to be you need to write it, and then you need to correct it. AI
Mhm.
can do all those things.
But no, but
Basically,
what? Sorry. Why is it hard for that particular thing about renting laptops? Like what?
oh,
Right. Yeah.
so let's say I have an idea,
Okay.
and my idea is I want to rent laptops. If this were a good idea, somebody would have done it. So I'm not claiming it's a good idea.
Right. Yeah.
I'm giving it as an example of something they
Right.
might want to do. Now, I have
Okay.
this idea. What am I going to do? I need an app.
Hmm.
How am I going to write an app?
So it's
Oh,
faster to get to the point where you can make an app if you're not
AI will
right.
write an app. If I
Yeah.
tell AI, here's
Write
what
me
I
an
want to
app.
do,
Yeah.
it will
Right.
write the code.
Okay. I
But
see.
that's true for
Yeah.
any app. So the
Oh,
the thing the thing is, I'm saying any idea that I have, AI can write the code for that app.
this is
Any
incredible
idea.
because it means people can experiment with things
I don't
much
need to
more
know
easily,
code.
right?
All I
Yeah.
need
Yeah.
to do is I have an
Yeah.
idea saying, darn,
Yeah.
that's what we should do.
Yeah.
Because the thing that holds people back is getting some programmer to write the app.
Right, right. Yeah, because you need to hire some guy who's not very agreeable and he likes to eat
It's hard to
tacos and
explain what your idea
yeah.
is,
Yeah. And then
but AI
he's
can
got some opinion on it and you're arguing with
so
him and this kind of thing.
AI
Yeah.
can do this, and it's created by AI. I look, no,
Yeah.
that's not what I wanted. Here's what I want,
Right.
and then AI will
Right.
write it
Yeah.
again. The fact that AI can write code means the democratization of app creation.
That's really amazing. Yeah. Okay. Let's move on
So
to
there's no
go ahead.
direct connection. That's really the point. There's no direct connection to the laptops. I just
Right,
spun out
right,
some story.
right.
So presumably all of your listeners have a better idea than that. But whatever their idea
Maybe.
is, they can get AI to write the code that will allow them then to put that app up on the Google store. And maybe it'll work, maybe it won't, but they can take their shot.
Let a thousand flowers bloom, right? Yeah, or maybe someone will take that idea and try and do it. Okay, so I'm going to switch to another student, a guy called Aziz. I believe he's also I believe he's a Moroccan immigrant as well. Um, again, about the sharing economy, a lot of stuff about the sharing economy. Okay, this one's a technical question that I think you'll like. How do current regulations affect transaction costs in the sharing economy, and what changes could reduce these costs? Because this guy was really listening to you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Um, Almost anything having to do with licensing, for example. So one of the things that I'm interested in is the problem of poverty. Could we use something like universal basic income? So at present, if I'm poor and I live in the city of Detroit, if I get a job, I will lose my benefits. Or if I move to Dallas in Texas, where there's a lot of jobs, I will lose my benefits. So the generally having government regulations that are piecemeal and that create bad incentives are the problem.
Right.
And so if I move to North Carolina and I want to work as a hairdresser, I have to get 1,500 hours of training at a hairdresser school, even if I have years of experience as a
In another
hairdresser somewhere
state.
else.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
that there's no reciprocity among states.
Really? Wow.
And
God, that's terrible.
there are schools, and I'm making air quotes again. I'm sorry to keep doing that, but there are schools in North Carolina where, in order to get a license, you have to spend money tuition for 1,500 hours of training. And so it's clear why, from an interest group perspective, what the benefit is. Existing hairdressers find competition inconvenient. And these schools are willing to pay large campaign contributions in order to keep this exclusive right to provide the so-called training. Now, the only people that pay are consumers, but they don't pay that much more. And the people who would like to be hairdressers but can't afford to spend 1,500 hours requiring the government's license. Now, you have beautiful hair, Jason. So
Oh,
I don't
thank
want to
you.
be I don't want to be in any way critical of this, but
Go ahead.
we could make judgments about whether someone is a good hairdresser or not
Yeah.
based on whether they give good haircuts. And
Yeah.
so over time, people who somebody goes once and then they don't go back, that person probably won't. The profit test is a very
Yeah.
good way of
Yeah.
doing this. Most people don't use many chemicals. They're not the set of things that they do not require any specialized training. It may require experience, and it
Hmm.
may require that I can reach a judgment based on I look at my hair, it looks good, it looks bad. So for movies, we don't have a government agency saying whether a movie is good or not. You don't have to have a license in order to produce that. In order to produce drugs, you have to have a check on whether it's safe and whether it's effective. That's fair enough. I actually think that for drugs, it's probably hard to tell. For the Food and Drug Administration is not where I would start in deregulating in the United States. So the question was, what government regulations
Exactly.
are
Yeah.
the ones that matter?
So hairdressing stuff is an obvious low-hanging fruit that we could just,
Occupational
yeah,
licensing
yeah,
generally.
yeah. So
So
this
the
is
occupational licensing generally, zoning restrictions. We have largely in the US made it illegal to build new housing.
yeah,
And
yeah,
then we say, why are rents so high? Well, you
yeah,
made it illegal to build new housing. So
yeah.
let's make it possible, at least legal, to build new housing. So if we occupational licensing and the elimination of extremely restrictive zoning in a lot of cities. Those two things would free up a lot of new jobs and a lot of new economic activity.
Yeah, it's a very it's seemingly obvious point that the Food and Drug Administration, like if I take a drug to cure a headache or something, I'm putting something into my body. I mean, that's very serious. Whereas someone's cutting my hair, I mean, what are the potential dangers to
Flower
me?
arranging. There's a
Are
flower arranging in Louisiana. Flower arranging requires 1,000 hours of
you
training,
serious?
which
Wow.
is the well, existing flower shops prefer not to have competition. And so
What is
there's
there?
no
Do you know the rationale? I mean, is there how is there a public safety rationale? Like,
yeah,
I'm
they
picturing
want to protect the public
from
from
what?
misuse of fertilizers,
Fertilizer.
they want to guarantee quality.
But yeah, okay. I mean, all right. Yeah, again, it goes back to this thing that I always find myself sort of speechless when people say, "Oh, I have to guarantee the quality." If it's not dangerous, if I go to flower shop A and they do me a nice job for $20, and I go to flower shop B and they do me a better job for $15, I'm going to go back to the second one. Like I just don't understand why there's this assumption. I think older people, I know people in my father's generation often say, well, you have to guarantee quality for the consumer. It's almost like it's a given in some, and that's why I think it's accepted because a lot of people
That's
assume that you need this or else there's going to be chaos. Is that,
yeah, yes.
yeah. So,
No, I mean you both posed the question and answered it.
yeah, sorry about
I
that.
don't know that it's just old people. I think the younger generation, maybe we skipped a generation where
Yeah.
libertarian nut jobs like you believe in the market as a way competition can discipline bad action and select for the competent. But old people and young people, they would say they'll literally say, but there has to be a process
Yeah. Yeah.
like licensing. Let's make sure that people are qualified. I'm a fan of that for airline pilots.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think airlines should compete on their safety records. We've only had 7 fatal accidents this year.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you want to test to
Yeah.
see it, because I can't tell if this person can fly or not. It's like
Yeah, I'm
putting
just gonna
drugs in
get on his
a bus.
plane and try him out. It's like, no, that's
But
not so good, right?
flower arranging and hairdressing,
Yeah.
no.
That's really interesting. Yeah. So you could separate it out even from the sharing economy. You could say, where are there sectors where there's over intervention by, you mentioned occupational licensing is a good one. And
And
try
housing,
it's
yeah.
yeah, and it's very hard because I mean, as you say, it's a kind of a dog's breakfast. Every city and state and province, they all have their own organizations, and some of them are legitimate. Like it's called in Quebec for doctors, Le Collège des Médecins du Québec. I mean, I don't want. I mean, I want when I go to a doctor, I want to know that that person has gone to medical school and passed through
Yep.
a series of. Like, I don't want to have to be wondering, did this guy is his degree real or this kind of thing, right?
Well, we
Whereas
have,
if I'm getting my hair cut, I mean,
yeah.
it's a very,
We have all sorts of private licensing boards. So in the US, licensing to be a doctor or a surgeon is done by a private licensing board. Now, the government says you have to have one of those in order to practice, but that's different from saying you have to have a diploma from because for doctors, it makes sense. And it
Mhm.
takes an expert to recognize an expert. And
Right.
that
Right.
actually is the argument for why we have this for flower arranging. You have to be an expert in flower arranging to
Right.
be able to say, does this other person know enough? Well, there's a real incentive problem that, I think we have enough flower arrangers already. You're not a
Yeah.
good flower
And
arranger.
I'm an expert in flower
Yeah,
arranging,
I'm
and I
totally an
sell
expert.
flowers too, right?
So
Right.
these licensing boards often are already private. It's just that the state requires you to have that. The
Okay.
question is,
Yeah.
I don't have an objection to a flower arranging board. If I can put on my wall a certification from the National Board of Flower Arrangers and consumers value that, great. I just don't think it should be required for these non-essential kinds of things. For surgeons, okay. You have
Yeah.
to have a surgeon's license that's provided by a private board, not for flower arranging.
It's really interesting because I know that here in Quebec, one example in one of my other classes, one of the vocabulary terms is what's called a professional order. So there are some professional orders that it is mandatory. I believe the Quebec Bar Association, for example. I can't practice law in Quebec unless I'm a member, but
Yeah.
I can be a translator in Quebec. I can, if I want, I can offer my services up on Facebook Marketplace or whatever. People can hire me. I don't have to be a member. The downside is that I can't charge as much money because I'm not a member of the organization. People use those things as a form, the same way that they use diplomas when they're hiring someone. They think this person is a member of the Quebec
Yeah.
Order of Translators, so therefore he or she probably knows what she's doing. So we're going to pay a premium to get that person to do the job,
Now,
right?
Jason, now you've raised a sore point. I was hoping we could avoid this.
Okay.
Why do college professors need a PhD?
Good
That
question.
is that
Yeah.
is such a steaming load of crap.
Yeah.
A PhD is a research degree.
Yeah.
If you want someone who's a good teacher, maybe a PhD will help, but it's a different thing. And
Hmm.
so, perhaps I shouldn't be the first to throw stones because in my very industry, we have this
Yeah.
ridiculous requirement. You have to go somewhere and spend 6 years writing a book that no one will read before you're allowed to talk to students.
Yeah.
Those are just unrelated tasks.
Very different. I mean, in theory, if you're good at writing, then you may be good at standing in front of people and talking to them. So maybe I mean, you just to try and steel man, right? I mean, that would be the
Yeah,
theory,
that's a
right?
really bad theory.
Yeah, yeah.
I,
Right,
I will
yeah,
give you that it is a theory, but it's
yeah.
not a good
That's
theory.
not a good theory. Yeah, I mean it's interesting. When I first started working, our system here in Quebec for what we call college is a little bit different from university. So I'm in the college system, which is partly a technical thing and partly a pre-university thing. But one of the things I remember when I first got into the system was I had worked abroad teaching for a couple of years, and at one point they had me come in because this connects to what you were saying, where they had to sign to accept that I had this experience outside that was not education related. And I was informed at the time they were trying to do this to try and encourage more, someone who worked in a biological lab, let's say, for 10 years instead of, getting a PhD in biology to be able to get the same equivalency in pay to try and encourage people to come into the system, which I don't know. You talked a lot with Russ Roberts about this is a government run school system, and they seem to have, in my view, that seems like a good decision. Could
Yeah,
be maybe because it benefited me. I'm saying that I don't know.
I
You
would.
know,
Why not have two tracks? One
yeah,
is you can get it through degree certification, and the other is you can get it through experience certification. And there's always problems with implementation. But the
hmm,
fact is, each
yeah,
of those things is going to make you a better teacher. So let's concede for a moment that the degree is a help because you've shown that you know. Whether you can write and that translates into teaching, I don't know, but you have to have some level of knowledge in order to get a
expertise.
PhD.
Yeah, right,
And so you've been certified an expert, or you can have experience in this field that will, when you help students learn that, they'll be able to be better students as a result. But that's a form of deregulation.
right,
That would
right.
be in the case of the flower arrangers, you have to have this degree,
Hmm.
or you can have worked for 7 years as a flower arranger in Minnesota. We
Yeah.
will accept that as
Right.
an alternative path. They
Yeah.
don't accept that now.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, it's one of these things. You've brought it down to a very local, granular level where it's almost like there's sort of a thousand little, weeds to pull out or
Well,
something,
it's
you
friction.
know?
All these frictions that prevent us from
Frictions.
finding
Yeah.
new ways to serve each other.
Yeah. And that gets down to just kind of hard work in every local area, looking around, people thinking, what can I do to try and go and, you know, try and maybe get this particular thing deregulated in some way, or maybe it needs some sort of better regulation.
Yeah,
It's
I
very
guess
local
I'm
specific.
the I bridle at the idea that regulation is a commodity and we have more or less of it, like corn.
Right.
You
Right.
know, I can look in a
Yeah.
silo and I can see how much corn is in a silo. And
Right.
regulation is not like that.
Yeah.
Some
Yeah.
regulation is good and some is bad. And so
Yeah.
saying, we need less regulation, I'm not sure that's true for airline pilots.
Right. Right.
uh, I actually think that what we need is to think about the consequences of being wrong. That
Mhm.
is, what's going to happen if this system fails. Airline pilots, bad. Flower arranging, we
Not
can
so
live with
bad.
that.
Yeah, you can plot them. I sometimes do this with students as a way of illustrating something. You try and find the two extremes, right?
Right.
Like, so you say, like, on the one side, yeah, if I'm going to a doctor, I want to, I don't want him doing a surgery on me or something. On the other hand, if I'm, buying flowers or getting something translated, it's only me. If I get something badly translated, it's like my business is going to suffer. It's not, it's not going to hurt me physically. It's just going to harm my whatever I've invested in, right?
And you can say, I'm not going to do that again.
Right.
So we can
Yeah.
we can actually parse this. So for a restaurant, you could have someone go around undercover and taste the poutine.
Right. Yeah.
They could taste the burritos
Yeah.
and say, the cilantro was rancid, we're shutting you down. We don't do that.
Right.
What we do
Right.
is we
Yeah.
send a health inspector to look at the kitchen, which I, the consumer, don't see. And if
Mm.
there's rats, there's unsafe conditions in the kitchen, then we close the restaurant down. So the effectiveness, okay, that will let consumers decide. Does it taste good or not? They'll decide whether to come back. But the safety, the equivalent of side effects in drugs. So
Hmm.
a drug should cure and not kill.
Hmm.
So if I take an aspirin and it kills me because it's poisonous, that's a bad side effect.
Right. Yeah.
I'm worried about that for food. I'm willing to have the government regulate health. They'll check in the kitchen where I can't see. There's no reason the government should be in charge of how the food tastes. We can handle that. That's the effectiveness side. So if you
Hmm.
split this into safety and effectiveness, I think most of the time the government should only be regulating safety
Mm.
and allow
The
effectiveness,
effectiveness.
let consumers
Yeah.
decide that. I draw the line somewhere short of airline pilots
Right.
because it
Right.
doesn't matter how pleasant the flying experience is if we die. And so
Yeah.
we will regulate that. Although even then, if we regulate whether the pilots are capable of landing the plane, then we'll let consumers decide whether long delays in getting their baggage or the fact that the coffee tastes bad, I'll fly a different airline. We don't have to regulate that.
Well, one of the examples I give in many of my classes, it comes from not Don Boudreau, but I'm blanking on the name of the guy who the other economist. Anyway, he does this whole thing about examples of interventions in the economy, and he did a whole video lecture about the price controls on airline tickets in the 1970s. And once they lifted those price controls, my girlfriend and I flew to Calgary about just under a month ago. We flew on this new airline called Flair Airlines. And literally, this airline, if you bring a backpack, they're going to charge you $50. They're going to weigh it. And so they tell you can bring a laptop bag. That's it. And some people go, "Oh my God, that's so unfair." The ticket was $80
Yeah.
return, 80 Canadian dollars to fly to Calgary and back, So it's like, okay. So I got on that plane and I very carefully packed a laptop bag with a bunch of socks and things and so on. Okay. And I brought my own candy and coffee, whatever. Now, I wasn't worried about the plane crashing. Right? I mean,
Yes.
I thought that the
Yes.
pilot probably, even though it's cheap, he probably knows how to fly
Yeah.
the plane between here and Calgary.
Because there's a government
Exactly.
requirement that they be
Yeah.
licensed.
Right. And they're allowing the price to float otherwise,
Yeah.
although there's a long discussion about the federal government in Canada intervening in the things like air travel, which is a separate discussion that we can't go into here. But okay. Yeah. So basically everything goes back to answer the student's question, friction and how much intervention there is that so what you're it sounds like you're saying there might be areas where there could be sharing economy apps that could be created, but there's just so much friction on the existing that people just default to the flower arrangers because it would be too hard to go. The app creator would be sort of under an avalanche of government regulation. They're just like, forget it, it's not worth it, right?
Yes. And so licensing in order to rent things, for example. So the I have to be able to do enough paperwork before I could get a license to operate a business renting things. So maybe I own 3 or 4 bikes and I on Spinlister, I rent them out. And so I will deliver them to you. And notice that the advantage of renting bikes is so suppose you have a student who lives in Calgary, they're going to school in Montreal. They have a bicycle, um, but they're going to be gone for the summer. Now, they could pay to store the bicycle over the summer, but that's probably going to cost them $20, $30 a month to store it. Suppose they could rent it out for just $10 a month. They're making $40 a month. The
Yeah.
$10 they get from revenue plus the $30 a month, they're not storing it. But if there are restrictions on licensing that sort of thing, then a bunch of these
Right.
activities will not take place. And so I think we need to be more flexible about considering commercial transactions rather than saying they have to be operated by somebody who has a license,
Mhm.
somebody who has filed for the government's permission to do this, and let people find new ways to cooperate and to serve each other. But as it stands, I think an awful lot of people, like you said, for older people and younger people, have this sense, well, wait, there has to be a process because otherwise there will just be chaos. That's not really true. What happens is people construct, we see the spontaneous emergence of new ways of cooperating, and apps are just a way of writing those down and making them even cheaper.
Reducing the friction. Yeah,
Yeah.
emergent order is such an beautiful concept in economics. It's one of the vocabulary terms. Okay, well, one thing, just a final thing I'd say about that is one way that might break it down is not every state and not every province has regulatory agencies for these things. So if somebody started a flower arranging app in some, I don't know, Saskatchewan, wherever, some place where there is no such agency and it worked, and then it was replicated in other places, then eventually the people in Louisiana would have some relative living in another state and go, hey, what's this? And they might be able to lobby their stupid state government to deregulate it. I don't know if that was one
Yeah,
way.
I'm
Yeah.
not claiming that the state regulator is stupid. I'm saying they're self-interested.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's a very
As
important
it
distinction.
stands,
Yeah.
very few people vote on
Yeah.
this, but let's follow your example. This has happened over and over again with Uber.
Yeah.
So I
Right.
visited Austin, Texas at the time when Uber was illegal. And a lot of people flew somewhere else, drove in an Uber, rode in an Uber, and they come back to Austin and say, what the heck?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the taxis were
Yeah.
very powerful in
Yeah.
Austin. But eventually, people who did just what you said broke the power of taxis. So if there's enough consumers
Hmm.
that will vote on this basis, then politicians will eventually come around. If you grab a politician by his voters, he
Yeah.
will follow you.
Yeah.
But it may be Uber is an example where that sometimes happened, but it's because people traveled somewhere else
That's
and
right.
saw it.
That's right.
Airbnb
Yeah.
has some of
Whereas
that also.
well, I don't typically, yeah, when I go somewhere else, I might take an Uber, but would I buy flowers? It would depend, it's
Yeah.
less likely. So yeah. Whereas you might have a relative. That's part of the reason that Uber spread so quickly around the world. Yeah, the last holdout, the biggest city in North America was Vancouver. that held out up until I think about a couple of not long ago. They kept Uber out, and then finally it was, it all came crashing down. But okay, I want to transition. I want to go through more of a slightly different thing, and then a couple of my women students sent more personal questions about you, not personal, but just more about
Hey,
you.
hey, hey,
Yeah.
easy.
Yeah. No, no, no. Just it was interesting how I had the more technical ones were all from male students, and then from the women, I had these more sort of about you as a
Okay,
person.
I completely disavow the sexism
Yeah.
that's involved in this
Yeah.
observation. So
I
you're
apologize.
on your own here, Jason.
All right, fair enough. So Yasin, a guy I told you about earlier, with the amazing idea, he sent some questions in. We talked a lot in the class about this question, about how the inequalities, and we've talked about it in this conversation. Some people are born less fortunate than others and make choices that deteriorate their financial situation and their choices to prosper. Do you think that a country with a free market system that is not regulated and where there is no safety net is a fair environment where they could have a chance to properly prosper? If not, do you think that it is people's duty to make their situations less miserable, or should we let the market decide and intervene? So this is the classic problem of what to do with, people down at the bottom, homeless people and people who are poor and so on. And I don't know. It's a deep question, a hard question.
Well, politically, so I'm an incrementalist. We seem to have decided that we're going to have a social safety net, particularly for women with children.
Mm-hmm.
For some extent to men, homeless men also, but uh, we provide pretty substantial benefits in the United States to the poor. Um, I look at that and I take the total amount of money we spend on anti-poverty programs and we divide by the number of poor people. There should be no poor people.
Right.
We're
Yeah.
spending
Right.
enough per person that they should all be out of poverty. Well, why do we still have poverty? The answer is we don't actually give them the money.
Yeah.
So I've written in a number of places that I favor, compared to the current system, I favor universal basic income. So a universal basic income means we would give them the money.
Yeah.
Now, there would
Yeah.
still be a question from your student. Yes, but a lot of people are not capable of making good choices. They'll waste the money, they'll buy
Sounds like what he
drugs.
was getting at. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, at
Exactly.
that point, I'm willing to say we have to let people be the best judges of their own welfare. The
Right.
problem is where I run into trouble with this argument is children.
Yeah.
Children are not making their own choices. So suppose we give a person universal basic income, including stipend for children, and they spend all of it badly and the children are starving.
Yeah. What do we do then?
We probably would do what we do now, and that is Child Protective Services comes in and takes the children if the parents are not capable of, and that's really bad.
Yeah.
But we're doing that now. So the hopeful thing is we don't have a system where there's no welfare. We have a system where there's actually a ton of welfare spending. It's just ineffective.
Right.
So it's not that we're doing nothing. It's that what we're doing sucks.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
creating a set of impoverished people who, if they do either of the two sensible things, get married or get a job, they lose their
Lose the
benefits.
benefits. Yeah.
So the marginal
Yeah.
tax on poor people exceeds 100%. It's often as high as
Crazy.
140%. So if
Wow.
I get a job and it pays $12,000, I lose $14,000 in benefits. I'm not
Wow.
lazy, I'm rational.
Yeah.
And so that system is terrible. The alternative system only has to be better than that. I think universal basic income, I don't know, maybe there's something else. But we are not now saying, well, we're a capitalist system, you're on your own.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
spending a gigantic amount of money that keeps people in poverty as if they were chained up because all of the incentives prevent them from getting a job or getting married. So that's the worst system I can
Yeah.
imagine.
Well, it's tough because yeah, you've got this system of incentives. Some people quote unquote do the right thing. They say, my girlfriend who well, I've been with for a very long time or a short time. It's an interesting story, but when I first met her, she was a recent immigrant from the Congo, and many people from that country come here, and many of them end up, in social housing and getting, because they look at the incentives. They think, I could go and, try and save up money to buy a house, but then I could keep this low cost apartment. So, but, she made the decision like, no, I want to go and buy a place and move myself up. So it's tough to know. Some people are just going to do the right thing. Some people are going to respond to the incentives. But the one final question I would have about UBI, which is a more a difficult one, is, do you think there's this conservative idea that there's kind of dignity to going out and being forced to go out and work? And you wonder if there's UBI and some people don't have to work. Is that, like, I'm not stating this even as my own opinion, because I think that's kind of an argument that some people would choose not to work and then their lives would deteriorate as a result. I'm not saying the state has a solution to that, but do you have any comments on that particular problem as a,
Yes, and people
yeah,
always bring this up. UBI is a solution to that problem. The current system says if you get a job, you lose your benefits.
right, right.
That's what's
I see.
keeping people
Yeah.
from working.
Some people would
UBI
still choose not
says,
to work though, right? Like some people,
well,
because if they could get enough from the UBI, right? Is that
everyone chooses not to work now because
that's
the marginal tax rate is above 100%. Literally everyone
every poor
chooses
person, you mean?
not to work
Right.
because if they
Yeah.
work, they lose their benefits.
I
I
see.
don't think that most people, if I said you're going to get $1,000 a month, said, well, I'm done. That's all I need. They're going to try to get a job.
Some
There are
people
many
would. Some,
people
I
that want
guarantee
to,
you, some people would be like, you know what? I can just get by with that, and I'm
but
just.
they're doing that now.
That's
The
true.
point
Yeah,
is
that's a
they're
good
doing
point.
that now.
Yeah.
So more people are not working under the current
Right.
system
I see.
than would be
Yeah.
working under UBI. So the whole point of UBI is freeing up people to work.
Right.
And I actually find it racist to say that all of the people that are not working are lazy. What they are is rational. They work under the table. They find other ways of making money that they don't have to report to the authorities.
Yeah.
And the authorities, instead of giving them the money that taxpayers spend, they're sending bureaucrats to check under the bed. Is
Yeah.
there a man here? Have you got a man in this house?
I know.
That's a
It's so
terrible waste
absurd.
of money.
It infantilizes people
Yes.
in such a way. It makes them wards of the state in this very, yeah,
So
my,
I think a fair number of people, if they had some way of getting childcare, and if they had, because again, if I live in Detroit, if I move to Dallas, I lose my benefits.
right.
If I live in Detroit and I move to Dallas, I keep my UBI. I actually have some way of trying to set up housekeeping. Maybe I can go to school at night. I have a chance of getting a job. So that it reduces the frictions. As it stands,
Mhm.
people are stuck. They can't move, they can't get married, and they can't get a job.
That's
So you're
interesting. Yeah.
absolutely right that it is a problem that people can't work.
Yeah.
UBI is the solution to that problem.
My brother was a big fan of Andrew Yang when he came along. He had basically making these arguments. He was,
I
yeah,
was
I guess we
briefly, I
won't
was
know.
brief,
Go ahead.
I was briefly famous because Andrew Yang tweeted links to some of my papers on
Oh, really?
UBI.
Oh,
So
wow.
briefly, I was a Yang Gang
Oh,
fanboy.
yeah.
There were
That's great.
people. Oh, Munger's great. Then they found out I was a libertarian. That wasn't so great. But for about 5 minutes, I was a
You
big
were a
fan of
Yang bro? Yeah.
the Yang Gang. Yeah, I was a Yang bro,
Yang
right?
gang, Yang bro, yeah. Okay, so we've only got a few minutes left, so I thought I would move on to these. These are two students, Lean, who I've had before, and Maryse. They were both just, when you have a students in your class who are like a real pleasure, and they always have interesting things to say, and they're fun and stuff, and then they have a good attitude. So, okay, so Lean said, this is connected to you and your career. In your opinion, or based on your previous experience, what's the most important quality an economist should have to succeed in this field?
The desire to finish research and send it off or publish it, and then wait to see if there's a reaction and if they're wrong to rethink.
Okay.
So many people spend way too much time when they're writing something. They try to get it perfect. But
Okay,
you
I see.
learn things by sending it off to try to get it published.
So
And so
trial
the
and
reality,
error. right? Is
Yes.
that,
So
yeah,
the
right,
analogy that I
right.
use is to programming, actually. I call it machine intensive debugging. If I'm writing a program, I submit it to the computer to see if I get error messages back. If you want to be a successful economist, write up your ideas, send them out to the public, and then people will tell you, here's what you've done well,
Mhm.
here's what you've done badly. Now, it takes courage because you're usually wrong. You're almost always wrong.
Yeah. Jordan Peterson always talks about this when you have a theory that you want to prove in a sociology. He says, you just see what happens to your stupid theory. Once you put it up to the
Yes,
test, it's going to get shot
yes.
down, which is not a
But
bad thing. If your theory's thought down, you're going to learn a bunch of stuff, right?
well, one of two things is true. Your
Yeah.
theory is correct, in which
Right.
case you get credit. Far more likely, your theory sucks, and
But
you'll
you're going
find
to
that
learn
out.
something when it's shot down.
Yes,
You get right. You're going to
yes.
find out. Right. Yeah. Okay. So just to boil that down, a kind of a flexibility, and it sounds like a bit of not a fearlessness, but you need to
Oh,
be
willingness to fail.
willingness to fail. Yeah. That's the word.
Recognition, like in Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley, it's hard to become a founder of a new company unless you've already failed 2 or 3 times because
Supposedly they
you've
would
built.
ask that in interviews, and if you
Yeah,
didn't have a good failure story, they wouldn't
yeah.
hire you. Is that true?
You haven't
Yeah.
tried very hard.
You're right.
And so the failure doesn't mean that it's the end of the world. And I think that students have that trouble from high school onward. They take
Totally.
they don't want
Totally.
to take really hard courses because they want their GPA to be perfect. Take hard courses.
Yeah.
You may get a B, you may get a C, but you will learn far more if you're willing to accept failure as a badge of honor. I tried something hard
Yeah.
instead of, oh, you're stupid.
Yeah, because the reality is failing is really hard, like in the sense that it hurts. So when it happens to you, if you, then you're much more likely to go, what did I do that I could do better in the future, right? Much
Yeah.
more likely if you succeed, then whatever you did was right. So you don't need to actually think that much about what you just do it again. Same way, right?
Well, the flip side is that a lot of times we talk about failures as if, oh, we should feel sorry for them. They actually learned something.
Hmm.
Suppose that you won. So that I think there's a lot of college study about great men. Somebody was a founder of a company, they invented something. Let's go talk to them. Well, imagine that somebody wins the lottery
Yeah.
and you go to them and say, how did you pick that number? And they say, oh, well, the first 2 digits were my wife's birthday, and then it's my dog's weight.
So that's how you
Great.
should pick a lottery ticket,
I'm
right?
going to run right to the. It tells
Exactly.
you nothing.
Yeah.
Success tells you nothing.
Yeah.
What you need to do is look for failure.
Mhm.
Success means the person probably got lucky. We shouldn't study success. We
Mm.
should reward failure.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult question because people who succeed have often failed a lot. So usually it's after many failures. So you could study what they did that time as well, because something must have worked. They were also lucky at the same time, right? Yeah. I
I'm,
don't know.
I'm, I'm, if the person's explanation for their success is I learned so much from these failures. And so in my success, I did not do this and this and this and
Mm,
this. I'm willing to listen.
mm,
But what I did and it succeeded. I was
right.
in the right place at the right time. I tried hard. Good for you. You get to keep it. You win the lottery. I agree. You get to keep the money. That's fair.
Hmm.
But I don't think we should study that as much as we study success far too much as if we can learn something from this unique set of circumstances that will never be
Repeated,
repeated.
yeah. Well, I mean,
Whereas,
basically, what you're saying, we shouldn't study failures necessarily just because they're failures, but in the story of success, we have to find out what brought that prior to that success, is another way to think about it, right?
yeah,
Okay, so there's the last two, because we're up on time here. She also asked, did something happen in your life that led you to getting interested in the field of economics? Or why did you decide? This is personal to your past. Do you have an origin story there?
I do. It's a sad little origin story. I'll try to make it brief. I went to a really bad high school. My father was an abusive drunk who didn't graduate from high school, I thought I was really bad at math. I got into a fairly elite college, Davidson College near Charlotte, North Carolina. People know him because of Steph Curry, who plays for the Golden State Warriors, and he went to
Oh,
Davidson. But
nice.
so I had an advisor when I first got there who told me, because I said I can't take math courses, I'm going to major in history or English.
Okay.
And she said, looking at your test scores, you're just lazy. And so either you're going to take engineering and calculus, or you're going to find a new advisor.
Wow.
And I
Wow.
thought, well, okay, I'll do my best. And it turned out she was right that if you do the homework, math classes are much easier. That innovation, doing homework, that was a breakthrough. That really made a big difference. So I feel like a real creative act at that point, the turning in the homework. I ended up majoring in math, but I
Wow.
took some economics course because of her. Because of her, it completely changed
What
my
was her
life.
name? Do you remember her name?
Absolutely. C. Louise Nelson. And
C.
the C
Louise
stood for
Nelson.
Cora. So everybody called her Cora behind her back. But to her face, they called her Dr. Nelson. She
Doctor.
was terrifying. But she was not a good person. She was a mean person. But a lot of times, people who are mean may have your best interests at heart. She did more for me than somebody who had been nice. Okay, yes, oh, math is so hard. You should go take history courses where you feel comfortable. She
Wow.
said, you're lazy. Get off your butt and go take
Start
real
working.
courses. And that is why I am an economist, was
Wow.
someone cared enough about me to not be nice.
That's incredibly deep, and it shows it's very difficult to be. That person was being disagreeable when she needed to be disagreeable with you. Now, sometimes
Desperately.
if you're being disagreeable, you're just being a jerk. You're just not
Well,
being nice to a
she was a
person, right?
jerk, to be fair.
Right. She
This
had
was
to
not
be in that
selective. This,
instance. Yeah.
yeah.
Right.
Well, but you should listen to those people.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're right.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really tough because sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. And you don't want to, deliberately hurt people because what if she was telling that to you and it wasn't true? She didn't know you that well. Maybe
Nope.
you did work really hard and maybe, but she was playing the odds and thinking this guy got a high score and now he doesn't want to do it. He's probably lazy, right?
Well, and he's
Yeah.
whining, oh, it's too
Yeah.
hard, I can't do it. There was a 90% chance she was right. She
Right.
had been
Right.
advising for a long time,
She
and
could
she
look at
knew a
you and
lot
yeah.
about self-serving, whining young men.
Yeah, that's great. I'm really glad that we got that one done for Lean. So a last one is from Maryse. So she asked why you became an economist as one of the things, but it sounds like you're saying that going into math pushed you towards economics. Is that right?
Well, I had a professor, Charles Ratliff, who I wanted to model myself after because he was such a good teacher. His enthusiasm about economics as a system, as a way of thinking about the world. And then when I got to graduate school, I had other professors that got me more and more excited about thinking about economics as a way of thinking about the world. And I got really lucky again. One of my advisors was Douglas North, who later won the Nobel Prize in economics.
Wow. Oh, yeah.
And his explanation of the problem of development and why it is that some nations prosper and grow and others bump along near the bottom of their possible range of growth paths, that just seemed like such a fundamentally important question. And
Yeah.
economics gives you analytic purchase on that question. It doesn't answer it perfectly, but it gives you some ways to think about that. And
Yeah.
so I was seduced. I thought this is just great. I want to study this forever. And it's been
Yeah.
a great choice. I'm 65 years old, and every morning I still wake up and say, this is what I want to do.
That's great. I mean, that's yeah. Just a quick side note. you mentioned something about how there's a drinking game for the Douglas North mentions. Is that right?
Well, there's a drinking game for Econ Talk,
Oh,
and Douglas North happens. He mentioned so often that they
right,
ought to add
right.
another category. Oh, Doug North, chug.
Yeah, okay. So anyone listening to this, if you got a bottle of tequila, you can go take a drink right
Yeah.
now, following that tradition. Okay, so the last one actually connects really well to what you just said about how you think about this question. What, it's a very open one from Maryse. What do you love most about your work? Like just if you could boil it down.
Well, I'm sort of like the guy that won the lottery.
Yeah.
I'm at Duke University. My students are really smart. I say, go read this book, and they go read this book, and they're ready to talk about it tomorrow.
Yeah.
Most of the time, I wake up in the morning and I think, what am I going to think about today? So it is interesting, the tenure process. Some people make fun of it because tenure means that all material incentive to work ever again has been removed. But
Hmm.
for many people, people work harder after tenure than before because now there's no risk. I write all the time.
I
I
agree. It's one tenure is one of those very controversial things, and there's a kind of a freeing. Many years ago, I worked for a multimedia company, and I remember when I worked there, it was a lot of fun, and I became a producer of websites and stuff. And I remember it was great, but I remember spending a lot of time being really concerned about how much the others were making and whether they were like, there was all this sort of other stuff that was going on. And maybe that helped us do better, all that competition, but it used up a lot of my energy. And I remember thinking, if I can get into a job like as a teacher of some kind, then maybe I can kind of turn my attention away from all that. Someone else, I mean, I'm part of a union. So someone goes to Quebec City, the union goes and they negotiate the contracts, and if it's not working, then we have to go out and strike. Okay, and I don't have to think about all of that, and I can try and direct my energy to being a better teacher and trying to, so I don't know if that connects to what you were saying. Do you have any comments about that?
I'm I rarely am in a position to compare myself to anyone else, except that we're all trying to produce ideas, and so there is competition for ideas.
That's
And
true.
so
Yeah.
that I think a lot of people are pretty jealous about that. I'm lucky that a lot of times people will disagree with me, and I'll think, that's probably right. So I've changed my mind about a lot of things. So the blessing is that I get to decide what I want to think about every morning, but I do get constant feedback from the outside. I'm not living in some garret working on a masterpiece.
Right.
I'm
Right.
I'm writing op-eds. I'm doing podcasts. So I've
Mm.
gotten a lot of comments from the podcast with Russ Roberts on Econ Talk. Some of them made objections, right? That's actually probably right. I
Mm.
could have done that better. I could have given a better explanation. So the fact that I'm a public figure, but that I'm safe from being fired,
Mm. Yeah.
uh,
There's
it
a
gives me
bad
a lot of
tension there,
latitude.
right?
Well, but that's
Yeah.
that's what tenure should be.
Yeah.
So I'm not free from criticism,
Right. Right.
but I'm free from the threat of being fired. It is possible that some people, once they're tenured, just stop working because it's hard to keep putting stuff out when you're not going to get paid more for doing that. But I actually see it as freeing because it means that now I can just read the criticism and try to decide if it's right or not. I don't need to fear, oh, I'm being criticized, I'm going to be fired.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's also, you have to kind of, you can't have one without the other. So you have to just sort of offer it to professors, and then some of them are not going to use it as much as you do, maybe, or maybe as I do. I don't know, and others will. And, most, you sort of generally hope most are going to do the right thing, and most probably do, right? One thing that struck me while you were talking is Thomas Sowell had this incredible line about intellectuals, that they work entirely with ideas. And I believe he said something like Adam Smith never ran a business and Karl Marx never ran a gulag, right?
Yeah,
Something like that, right? So
yeah,
so you're in the realm of ideas, basically,
yes.
right?
I mean,
Okay, go ahead.
being in the realm of ideas is a great blessing. And so I
Yeah.
want to thank all of you in society who make it possible for me to live basically the ideal life. So
Yeah.
I recognize I am blessed.
Yeah, me too. I was just going to say that that's exactly how I feel, that I feel very lucky generally in my life. I'm very, and so just we're up on time. So I want to thank you again. These questions, I didn't even get to all of them, but I'm going to reuse the podcast. So hopefully it's right. It was very rushed when I did it this past winter because it was, I did one with Vincent as well that also got some really interesting reactions and it was kind of chaotic. As I go forward, I'm going to try and use them again, and then maybe with more input, maybe I could talk to you again because I found this. I don't know. I really enjoyed this, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate you taking the time, Mike. Okay.
Well, thank you. I really enjoy doing podcasts and I always learn stuff. So thanks for your time.
If ever you're in Montreal, hit me up, and I could take you out to some places, and maybe we could do it in person. I don't know.
My wife and I will be in Montreal in early August.
Is that right? Okay. Well,
Yeah.
text me, and
So
maybe I could meet up with you, or maybe we could do one of these in person. Maybe I could take you out. Something like that.
that sounds great.
Okay. Thanks, Mike.
All right. Thank you.